Hi, this is Rahman Sheikh. Welcome to Fortnightly Railway Transportation Systems podcast. I am the host and railway systems specialist. This podcast is primarily focused on railway experts who have vast amount of experience and contributed greatly to this amazing industry. This is not a technical seminar but focuses on feel good stories, individual journeys, their success and failures, motivating younger generation to kickstart their career in railways and creating a sense of pride for the railway people who devoted their lives on the most environment friendly public transportation. Welcome to another episode of the Railway Transportation Systems podcast. And today we have the pleasure of speaking with John Scaife, a distinguished figure in the rail industry with over 24 years of experience. John is the head of engineering at Interface Rail Engineering and is a chartered professional engineer. His extensive career spans from his beginnings as a track engineer with London Underground to his current role in Australia, where he provides complex engineering, technical advisory, and design review expertise to major rail projects. John's expertise includes track and civil design, project management, technical standards authoring, and interface management. He has been instrumental in delivering significant rail infrastructure projects across Australia, including the Melbourne Airport Rail, Metro Tunnel Project, and the Regional Rail Revival Program. With a strong commitment to excellence and a proven track record in managing multidisciplinary teams, John brings a wealth of knowledge to today's discussion. Hi, John. Welcome to the pod.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with my first question. Can you share with us your journey from starting as a graduate track engineer with the London Underground to becoming the head of engineering at Interface Rail Engineering?
Yes, certainly. Well, I always like to, looking back on how I joined the railways, I always like to say I got lost on my way towards the water industry. So I was doing a degree in civil engineering that specialised in water studies. I was looking to find a career in the UK water industry. Now, I applied to a whole heap of a range of people, but mainly water companies when I was looking to graduate. I then I lucked out with an interview with London Underground. I didn't know much about railways. I didn't know much about railway engineering, but I went along just out of interest. And yeah, I got accepted and I was taken on as a graduate track engineer on London Underground's graduate training scheme, this was back in the late 90s. And they had an excellent training scheme that moved graduates in different placements around the network and the system. And they started us in maintenance. My initial couple of placements were in the track maintenance department in North London and in the structures maintenance department. I then moved into the tunnels team and into more project orientated teams after that. So following a couple of years of doing different placements as a graduate, I then got seconded by London Underground to a tier one consultancy to learn alignment design, how to design track, how to prepare the drawings, how to present that to clients. And I took those skills back to London Underground and we developed our own in-house design team to do quite straightforward OPEX type design, renewals designs, tunnel reconditioning designs and things like that. So that was me for about the first 3 to 4 years of my career. I then took a career break and went backpacking, got back and I took a job with a design consultancy in the Midlands doing mainline renewals on the bigger mainline network in the UK in the London North West section and got heavily involved in doing track renewals designs. Very complicated, constrained, brownfield, tricky design work, So I did that for 3 or 4 years. It was very hard work, but extremely beneficial in the complexity of the work I was doing, the experience I gained, and the senior people that I had to work with to perform these works. So I learned so much from the older engineers doing the work. We were picking up projects that were so complex. The best way of lowering the risk on them was to drag people out of retirement who had last done the renewal in that site. They would come out and work part-time, these old retired guys, and they knew what the job was like last time because they had done the same thing 30 years before. So I had the privilege of building my knowledge off their experience. That was invaluable. Now that took me up to about 2006. After that, my then fiance at the time and I decided we'd like a change. And that led to me being recruited by a consultancy in Melbourne, and we relocated over here to Australia. Since we've been in Melbourne, what I've found is a big difference between what I was doing in the UK and what the equivalent job is in Australia is the UK seems to be, it's very railway. It's a mature network. It has an old and mature way of doing things. There are major projects in the UK. Crossrail is one example. There's the odd capital works project that happens, but that's really a bolt on to the industry. The core industry in the UK is about keeping the existing network running. It's very much a brownfield operational, retention of a maturing network. In Australia, I've found it's a lot more new build orientated. Most of the industry in Australia is geared towards building new railways, building greenfield sites or significant upgrades of capital works. Far more new build experience in Australia compared to the renewals experience I had in the UK. But what I was able to do was take some of the skills and techniques that I used in brownfield renewals in the UK and actually apply it to some of the problems we faced on the bigger projects when I got here in Melbourne.
Great knowledge transfer. John, as you touched my second question about you moving to Australia, and we did speak about some of the differences between the two railways, can you give me an example of the biggest challenges you faced when transitioning?
There's an embarrassment of British railway engineers here working in Australia. So there wasn't really a cultural issue at all with moving from one country to another. It was amazing how often I bumped into people I was working with previously in the UK that I didn't even know were here in Australia. So it felt familiar in terms of the characters and the culture and the way the industry worked. What was different is that leap from renewals, old mature network that's creaking along and you're making changes to keep everything running, to building something new or extending something or increasing capacity on a fairly new network, which is what we were doing in Australia. The timescales of the projects are different. The programs are different. Even the funding mechanisms vary through the franchises and things like that as well. So it needed an adjustment and a slight change in mindset to approach what the job was here in Australia and particularly in Melbourne. And I arrived before the big build works really got going in either Melbourne or Sydney. So it was a relatively quiet period compared to what we've both had in the last few years in Australia now. But it did I had enough time to kind of make that adjustment and be ready for when the major investment came in. In Victoria, that was for the regional rail link project in about 2010, 2011.
Well, great insights. I think a couple of people can relate that. As a subject matter expert in track and civil design, John, how do you approach the complexities of the track renewals, planning and management of large-scale projects?
Yeah, Howard, I'd like to think there's commonalities and there's differences between the renewals and the major new build projects. In brownfield track renewals, particularly if we're looking at junction work and we're looking at very constrained environments, very constrained timescales for the build, the old adage is that the devil is in the details, right? The more issues you can resolve and the more problems you can solve in design, the lower risk you've put into an occupation or a possession, in a limited timescale for the build. So it's very much concentrating on the details. The devil's also in the interfaces, right? You've got to align a number of disciplines, particularly in a junction work. You're looking at electrification, you're certainly looking at signalling, and you're looking at the way the under the track system's working with the drainage, the formation, and the earthworks under it. And you have to tie all those disciplines together and have a package of designs that can be constructed within the timescales, with the access and materials availability as well. And all of that has to meet a budget. The other thing with brownfield as well, and I'll move on to greenfield in a second, is pretty much when you're talking about standards or specifications, almost everything you're designing in a brownfield corridor will not comply with your current standard, right? So what you're very much doing within the renewals or brownfield environment is essentially trading off different non-conformances to standards with a view to reducing the risk. So you can't comply with this, you can comply with that, which you look at it from you throw the safety management system risk-based assessments at it, and you determine what is the best practicable way forward that's going to give you a SAFARP solution. So now I'm transferring that kind of experience to a greenfield project. When you're building something and you're getting it out of a box and you're putting it in a brand new corridor, pretty much, there's a handful of them, but pretty much you can expect that most of what you're designing will comply with the specification, will comply with the project requirements, and will comply with most of the standards. There's every attempt will be made to value engineer and occasionally seek a non-conformance where one can be justified, but you're pretty much building a compliance solution in the greenfield environment, whereas in the brownfield environment, you're probably building a non-compliance solution. Now, the trade-off that you then have in a greenfield environment where it's by and large compliant is you're then more in a conversation between the stakeholders for constructability versus maintainability. Something can be built quicker, but it may then be more difficult to maintain in its service life. So that's almost an OPEX versus CAPEX conversation. That conversation is happening in a technical framework. You're looking at technical issues, but underneath it, that's what's going on.
Great insights. John, I would like you to add some more insights, as especially in the design phase, because we're speaking about design and greenfield, brownfield projects. Let's focus on one specific project like Regional Rail Revival Program and the Inland Rail Program. Can you share a few more insights into the role of design review?
Yes, certainly. I would talk generally, my company, Interface Rail Engineering, we perform design reviews for a number of the rail operators. Bulk of our work is representing the end user. These major projects, there's always, depending on the way the contractual framework is set up and the operational franchise is arranged, there's always three competing groups, right? Generally, there's a client who's paying for everything. There's a contractor or a constructor who's building everything. And then there's an end user who's accepting everything. Now, generally, what we've done as a matter of course is we'll represent the end user and review the designs that the client's paying for, that the contractor is then building. What we're finding is we review against standards, we review against project requirements. We're also seeking a solution that can meet the maintainability and the constructability requirements. There's no project that every comment we make has to be closed to enable the project to proceed, and no one would allow you to obstruct the works, and nor should they. So what we found is there is certainly an art in asking the question in the right way and making sure you're providing a comment that can be responded and closed out. We always say when training up new reviewers, we say, look, you do have to learn this. You can write a design review comment in 1 minute. That's how long it takes you to write the thing down and put it into the project's documentation. It can take a week or 10 days to close out that one comment if you've asked it in the wrong way. So the experience and with a bit of training competency, it's ensuring that the review's being performed to meet all the quality assurance requirements, but it's also being performed in such a way that it can be efficiently processed, managed, and lead to an approval. So we're not unnecessarily holding anyone up. On a broader terms, we're moving more into from just track and civil design review aspects, looking at it more from a high level. With those the three parties you always have in the projects, the end user, the contractor, and the client, they're all in tension. And as they should be, the projects are set up like this, they're all pulling in slightly different direction, right? And what I've always found is that it's success, you're doing the job correctly and you've reached success when they're all basically complaining at about the same volume. If one particular group is really happy with you've probably upset the other two. I've often found that, the path to success is in by making sure they are all complaining about the same volume, all just grumbling.
So what strategies do you employ to manage this effectively?
Listening to what the concerns are. The downside with engineering particularly, and I find particularly with reviewing other people's work, the downside is often there's two things that can need to be managed. One is the more you look at a potential issue, the bigger it tends to become inside your own mind. So it's a matter of making sure the issue stays within proportion and relativity within your own mindset. So that's a matter of, making sure that you're mentoring people or providing support to people to ensure that problems don't get bigger than they have to, potentially. Other one is also making sure that we're able to, engineers will always tend to jump to what they see as the quick solution. They say, right, okay, we've had this problem before, please, the answer is that. It's a matter of counselling people to ensure that they trust the process. There's a process. You raise the comment, you respond to it, you have a workshop with it, you discuss it with the other parties, you talk to the client, you talk to the designers, you talk to the contractors, you reach a consensus and you move on. The classic engineering mistake is to jump straight to the answer you want and just ask for that, and then you're not trusting the process. You need to put the risk management framework in place, you need to work through the safety and design processes, and the process will result in the best solution for everyone. And I think it's a matter of trusting the process, not just making any assumptions or leaping straight into what you think the answer may be.
Wow, great insights, John. Right from track design to interface management, let's move to your other aspect of technicalities, that is authoring technical documents. You have worked on developing technical standards and authoring many technical documents. How do you ensure that these standards remain relevant and effective in a rapidly evolving industry?
It's a real art. Preparing a standard or even preparing a set of project requirements is a challenge, particularly if I talk specifically about, the standards that are owned and managed by a railway operator, like any of the franchisees we have here in Australia. The railway standards need to cover new build works to inform projects for anything that's being new or upgraded. They also need to cover renewals works or any minor upgrades and what their annual works plans will be doing internally. They also need to cover maintenance, and they need to cover maintenance of some very old, aged assets. Now, trying to do all those three things in one single document and make it readable and usable is an absolute monster of a task. What I found in doing it is that if you over-specify or you try and over-standardize with a one-size-fits-all solution, invariably you will end up having to write a lot of waivers or non-conformances and agree to, various parties performing non-conforming works with your standard or specification. If you lower the bar in the technical standards or specifications, you can run more of a compliant network, but then you may have introduced more risk onto the network because the bar's been lowered. So the operators, generally speaking, a choice is made either subconsciously or consciously, whether to run what you'd call a compliant system and standard governance process or a non-compliant system and standard governance process. And that's around how the bar is set in terms of what you actually mandate within your standards and how you work through. Now, I've worked for different operators that have different approaches with that. Some are writing a lot of non-conformances all the time, and that's fine, but it needs managing. It's heavy paperwork. But in doing that, it probably gives more control over each individual change if the operators are able to, manage the capacity to supervise that. I found personally in writing documents like this, what the process seems to be with me is I'll write something enormous. You end up with a huge, complicated, overlapping document, and it's then weeks and weeks of editing to trim it down, trim it down, trim it down. You try and move some content out into procedures for maintenance. You move other bits of content perhaps into a project requirements document, and you slowly trim down the header standard until you end up with something that can be readable and usable. So I find you go big with the content and then you finally trim it down until you've got something that's efficient enough to use.
I think you have sufficient reviewers and probably many working groups, I guess.
Yeah, now with the big builds that are happening now across the southeast of Australia, we have a lot of interested parties in any of the standards. The government departments are now delivering some of these works, the major projects. Everyone now has a stake in this, and so there's a lot of comments and a lot of discussion before any changes are made. But standards need constantly updating. The industry is always changing and the standards needs to change with it. Within the very near future, what we're going to see is more influence also from the recycle first policies and the sustainability policies we're seeing coming into the States being fed through from the federal government downwards. As we move forward over the next few years, it's going to be very interesting to see how we build the recycle first and the sustainability requirements into the standards, and also how we address the effects of climate change too.
Beautiful. I do agree and I concur that we need to continue working on these standards. Now, moving to your technical advisor role, John, what are the some key consideration when serving as a technical advisor for major rail projects such as regional rail link or a level crossing removal project?
Someone from a maintenance background, which is where I started, right? And with its painful lived experience has taught me that you don't know if something is stable until it's seen 2 hot summers on a railway. So what I find is generally the biggest lesson I've probably repeatedly learned, and I find myself raising all the time with projects and the operators, is ensuring we have early vigilance post-commissioning. Something is built, something is designed, something is built. People work through it, the processes are put in place. You go very carefully through testing and commissioning, and that's, what the project is obliged then to do. There's a point at commissioning where the trains start running. When the trains start running, what I've seen and what can happen is the competitive tension within the contract and project then dissipates. They're all generally exhausted because they've reached a major milestone in their build, and the project backs off, the project starts packing up. The end user, meanwhile, has got a brand new shiny bit of railway, but they've got a very old, more faulty bit of the network that they're focused on. So the tendency can be there's a gap, and that gap is typically 1 or 2 years after commissioning where there's not sufficient vigilance on the asset. With a brand new asset that's just come out of a box, that's just got trains running up and down it, any change at all needs to be monitored carefully, because the small changes become the big changes without necessary adequate vigilance. You can end up with an issue post-commissioning that you didn't spot in time. And then when it is spotted, the maintainers, when it's eventually identified, the maintainers are saying, well, we thought that was a project thing. And the project is saying, no, we finished, that's yours. I wouldn't name one single project, but as a general theme, I have seen that it would be easier for everyone if we had more requirements around defect liability period that calls out key responsibilities of how it's handed over, and that early monitoring of performance post-commissioning. We have so much vigilance in the build. We have so much vigilance in the design. The bit I think we need more in is that probably 2-year period after we started running trains.
Yeah, great lessons learned for the future projects, John. Thanks for sharing that. Now, given your experience with switch and crossing design, what are the critical factors to consider when planning and implementing these systems?
Switch and crossings, turnouts, diamonds, slips, compounds, whatever form they take, they're always changing, right? The suppliers are always refining something. So I find that a fascinating area, particularly of track engineering, is what's going on in the junction work. A, they're relatively complex. B, they're always changing. And C, they're always operationally critical. If you have a failure at a junction, very often it can get on the news. It will certainly disrupt passengers. So it's the focus and attention and the pressure around the junction works with the constant changing nature of the technology that you're using has always been fascinating. It's challenging, can be a little bit intimidating for, a newer engineer, but it's certainly it never seems to be dull, that area of the railway. One of the key bits I've always learned, and I relearn probably every year or two, never underestimate the interface between the track and the signalling disciplines on the junction works. And I'd narrow that down even further. It's the mechanical interface between where the track responsibility ends and where the signalling responsibility starts. And that tends to be 2 different groups of maintenance people responsible for them, reporting under very often different managers, and sometimes arguing over who's taking the blame for a delay. And as genuinely I've seen it in the UK, I've seen it here in Australia, I've seen it in all different places. There's always that kind of situation occurring. And I often think that tension is actually leading to changes in the actual built asset. The way these turnouts, sometimes these junctions are set up, and the choices around the equipment and maintenance practices and everything else, what's underlying that is a standoff between 2 different maintenance teams. That's engineering, right? But it's also human nature, and I've always found that fascinating.
It is. I can relate that. And every time a failure comes and a detention occurs and there's a fight between track guys and signaling guys, I always observed signaling guys are blamed for the detention.
Yeah, you see, you're a signalling engineer, aren't you? Whereas I'm a track engineer. I say the other way around.
So, John, thanks for sharing this. Let's move to the next question a bit about leadership. How do you navigate the challenges of leading a team of design reviewers while liaising with both internal and external stakeholders?
It's ensuring that when we're making comments, we have to make comments and that can be, closed out efficiently. We also have to ensure that the language is even. We're not being critical. We're not directing people or telling people how to do their jobs. We have to articulate what the concern is, what the potential benefit is to everyone to making a change or, correcting something or improving something. And we have to be able to then prosecute how that comment is addressed and in such a way that it doesn't hold up anyone else from continuing with the project works and nor does it cause any offence to, all the people who are working very hard on the jobs. What we do have to do, what's vital to ensure we do that properly is to gain the trust of the operators we're representing. So wherever we are, there's probably a team of, maintenance managers or operational managers who are taking the eventual residual risk and responsibility for running a network off what we have worked to design with the project. And we have to ensure we build a rapport with them. We have a constant dialogue with them and they have to trust us to make sure that we're prosecuting their needs, to the best of our ability.
Yeah, great insights.
The project can challenge you as a reviewer, but that's manageable. Yeah. What we can't do is lose the trust of the people we're representing. That's absolutely vital.
I completely concur with you, John. And there's a follow-up question. So what role does defect and issue management play in your current role? And how do you ensure that this effectively addressed in the projects you oversee?
Yeah, there's talking, like I referred to before, I'd always encourage everyone to doubly switch on the vigilance when something's just gone into service. A new asset or a new railway has no history of stability. You're relying on the testing and commissioning and the quality assurance to tell you that something is stable and going to work. That's not proved yet. You need to see it in service and you need to watch it to ensure that it is in fact stable. Now, for reviewers, designers and project teams themselves, you can learn so much from looking at stuff during the defect liability period. The first or second summers, I would encourage all of our reviewers and anyone else who was involved in design production to go and look at the asset in service. You can often say with when you're looking at a drawing before it's built, you should be able to tell how compliant that drawing is. That's what you should know as a fact. You don't know whether it's good or bad. You know if it's good or bad after it's seen like 200,000 tons of traffic or it's seen 6 months in service or something like that. The trains need to be running for you to know whether something was a good decision or a bad decision. Now, very often we can look at things on design and it looks unusual, it looks atypical. We can see risks and we have lots of comments and we're slightly nervous about it. We've checked the compliance, we've checked the safety risk and everything else, but it's a bit atypical. Now, very often we can do a site walk after commissioning and the actual built solution matches the design, but it's fine. When you see it in reality, you say, well, that works really well. What were we worried about? And you learn that and you take that onto your next project, right? And very often the converse is true. You can get something that's 100% compliant, that's ticked all the boxes in accordance with design, but some particular weird quirk of different factors and constraints comes together and leads to a unforeseen outcome. And you look at it, the operator's not happy, something's being a challenge, something's not stable. But you said, well, the design was fine, but the actual built reality is not working for us. You investigate that. Why is that? You might have to change the standard. You learn something else, you take it on to the next job. All of that only happens if you're looking at the built outcome. And if you're a designer or a reviewer sat in an office and you never go to site and you never see what happens after commissioning, you don't learn these lessons. That to me is vital, not just for the management of the asset in service, it's for the staff and the personnel working on the project. The most important thing a reviewer or a designer can do is look at what they've built afterwards.
Beautiful. Great insights, John. After speaking to you a lot, I'm really learning a lot, and so has the audience. So we spoke about design, documentations, standards, project management, design management, and now let's go to the main function, which is engineering. How has the role of engineering management evolved in the rail industry, do you think? And what future trends do you forecast in this field?
In railway engineering as such, now I'm now in my 25th year. It's almost exactly my 25th anniversary on the railway. So it was good timing
Wow.
that I'm talking to you in this pod. Just in the time I've been working on the railways, things certainly seem to move quicker now. With regards to how we're preparing designs, how we're delivering works, the project timescales from scoping of the project, forming the requirements, running the concept of operations, and actually seeing things built so much quicker now. Now, that may be because I've transferred from the UK, that is a bit slower and more complicated, into Australia, that's a bit more greenfield and faster. But I certainly can see some acceleration in the way these things are delivered. It's some of the level crossing removals we're seeing here in Melbourne now, the speed of the jobs is, it's breathtaking compared to what I can remember from about 20 years ago. So certainly things are accelerating. The technology is improving and helping that as well. I'm very interested to see what we can do with digital engineering with regards to drawing management and the way the design data is transferred to the build, how things are built and how we can work through design compliance and as built preparation and stuff like that using digital engineering techniques. Same thing with the turnout designs and the junction work designs as well. The turnout suppliers are starting to use what they call wheel transfer studies. They're dynamically running train wheels over 3D models of the junction work to work out where things are likely to wear and what the ride's going to be like over the units. That was never being done. When I joined the railway 25 years ago, we just did not have the software or the computer capacity to do that kind of modelling. So I'm very interested to see where digital design takes us in the next 10, 20 years.
Me too, John, me too. And finally, what advice would you give to emerging engineers who aspire to take on leadership roles in the rail industry?
Everyone is different, right? Depending on how you're talking to someone who's looking to join the rail industry or someone who's younger, is just graduating and coming in as a first job, or even we have people moving through apprentice programs rather than graduate programs. Every single person is different. And I do talk to a lot of younger engineers as they come through. As a general theme, what I've found is don't try and over strategize and pre-plan your career from day one. If you find a role or a position where you're scoring goals, you're performing, and you can do it, but it's not what you plan to do, keep doing it. If you can do it well and people can see you're performing, if you work at that diligently, opportunities will grow from that and you will move on. And very much, there's a certain ballast to the way people's professionals' careers develop, particularly in engineering. And often your role will find you as much as you will go and find your role. And
Wow.
another key theme I found as well in the railways, what helped me was joining London Underground, as a graduate, straight into the maintenance teams, getting the dirt under the fingernails, walking around on night shifts in the tunnels and things like that. That never leaves you. So I think it's important with an industry that's very much geared around projects and building projects and serving the project alliances and the delivery mechanisms. If the younger engineers have an opportunity to get maintenance or operational experience early in their careers, that will hold them in good stead. It's not like a project director with 20 years experience can park that role and go to a depot and get maintenance experience. It's very difficult to do it if you miss it when you're younger. So I'd say, if you can get some maintenance experience, do so. And don't overthink it. Just work hard, find some results, and the career will look after you. Ultimately, if you look after the railway looks after you.
Yeah, beautiful closing statement. Thank you, John. Thank you for your advice and thank you for your time onto this pod and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you.
I believe everyone listening to this podcast has got something to take away from today's discussion. If you like this podcast, please listen, follow, and share this podcast within your network. If you believe we should be sharing your story or someone within your network, there is a railway leader who should be here sharing his or her contribution to this industry, contact me on railwaytransportationsystems@gmail.com. Thank you for your time today. See you next fortnight. Until then, stay safe and take care of yourself.